Have you ever wondered what happens when greedy social climbers delude themselves into thinking they can cage a woman who controls a financial empire? They assumed one petty trick like hiding my car keys would leave me begging for attention. They forgot that when you back a powerful woman into a corner, she does not cry. She buys the entire building and crushes you under the rubble. Grab a seat, because this tragedy is just getting started. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled the monetization feature on our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you find today's story entertaining, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we have the funds to pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating these stories for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the comments section of this video. Now, let me introduce myself as Laurel Benson and take you into a world of fake smiles and real consequences. The sun was shining relentlessly over Napa Valley, casting a golden hue over the sprawling vineyards that the new money elite loved to claim as their playground. Today was supposed to be a day of celebration. It was the lavish wedding anniversary party for Chloe, the spoiled younger sister of my husband, Marcus. I am 34 years old, and I have spent enough time around this family to know that their events are never about celebrating love. They are theatrical performances meticulously designed to project a flawless illusion of wealth. When I walked into the hallway of our temporary vacation estate that morning, I immediately noticed the silence. The house was empty. I reached into the decorative porcelain bowl on the console table where I always kept the keys to my vintage Porsche. It is a rare, fully restored classic that I purchased for myself after closing my first major corporate acquisition. The bowl was completely empty. I checked my phone to see if my pre-booked executive car service was on its way, only to find a notification stating my ride had been canceled by someone using the house landline. It did not take a genius to figure out who was behind this. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, had orchestrated this pathetic little trap. Her goal was glaringly obvious. She wanted me to be stranded, forcing me to arrive late or not at all to a gathering of 300 elite guests. By doing so, she would have the perfect opportunity to play the victim. I could almost hear her theatrical sighs as she would tell everyone that Laurel was simply too irresponsible to show up on time, or worse, that I was bitterly jealous of Chloe's supposed happiness. Eleanor and Marcus always looked down on me. To them, my middle-class upbringing in Texas meant I lacked the pedigree required to sit at their polished dining table. They conveniently ignored the fact that I am a senior executive officer at Viridian Apex Holdings, a massive trust management conglomerate. I built my empire with blood, sweat, and relentless intellect, while they built their fragile status on maxed-out credit cards and country club gossip. They mistook my polite silence for weakness. That was their first fatal mistake. Standing in the empty garage where my prized car should have been parked, I felt absolutely no panic. Panic is a useless emotion reserved for people who do not have a backup plan. Instead, I calmly unlocked my phone and opened a proprietary satellite tracking application developed exclusively by my company's security division. The interface glowed on the screen, instantly pinpointing the exact coordinates of my vehicle. My car had not been stolen by some random neighborhood thief. The tracking beacon showed it was parked squarely on the luxury valet lawn of the Silver Pine Estates, the exact resort where Chloe's anniversary gala was currently taking place. I tapped the screen to access the integrated dashcam feed, which automatically uploaded to my secure cloud server. The audio and video recordings from earlier that morning painted a crystal-clear picture of their audacity. Marcus had driven my car, but he did not just take it for a joyride. The footage showed him pulling up to the grand entrance of the resort, greeting a group of his business associates with a wide, arrogant smile. Eleanor was standing right beside him, draped in designer silk, practically glowing with borrowed pride. "It is an absolute beauty, isn't it?" Marcus boasted loudly in the recording, leaning casually against the hood of my car. I managed to track down this extremely rare model and bought it as a surprise gift for the family estate. You know how it is. Only the best for us. My son has always had such exquisite taste, Eleanor chimed in, her voice dripping with fake elegance. "We are simply so blessed." I stood in my empty garage, watching my husband and his mother use my hard-earned asset to inflate their pathetic, hollow image. They were parading my success around as their own, weaving a narrative of immense generational wealth to impress people who would not give them a second glance if they knew the financial truth. They thought isolating me would make me invisible and helpless. They had no idea that I was watching their entire charade unfold in real time, holding the absolute power to burn their carefully constructed fantasy to the ground. Any ordinary person would have immediately hailed a premium ride service, stormed into the Silver Pine Estates, and screamed until their throat went raw. That is exactly the hysterical reaction my in-laws were banking on. They wanted a public meltdown, a scene they could point to as definitive proof of my instability. I did not give them the satisfaction. Instead, I turned on my heel, walked straight back into the sprawling house, and locked the solid oak door of my private home office. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, sat down in my ergonomic leather chair, and woke up my custom-built workstation. If Marcus wanted to play a high-stakes game of deception, he was about to learn that I owned the entire casino. I bypassed the standard biometric locks and accessed my multi-layered encrypted personal financial dashboard. My fingers flew across the keyboard, running a deep diagnostic on all assets registered under my name. The missing Porsche was a variable, and in my line of work, you never ignore missing variables. You track their digital footprints until you find the source of the discrepancy. I initiated a comprehensive sweep of public records, credit registries, and shadow banking ledgers. The processing fans on my computer hummed quietly. It took exactly 4 minutes for my proprietary algorithm to flag a massive, glaring anomaly. The truth was far more sinister than a simple, pathetic joyride. Marcus and Eleanor had not just taken my vintage car to boost their fragile egos in front of their wealthy friends. They had weaponized it against me. The high-definition screen displayed a freshly minted, expedited lien registered against the vehicle. According to the digital ledger, my car had been used as physical collateral to secure a high-interest, short-term shadow loan. The principal amount made my eyes narrow in cold realization: $300,000. I leaned closer to the glowing monitors, my mind operating with the mechanical precision of a courtroom prosecutor building an airtight federal case. Where did $300,000 disappear to in the span of less than 24 hours? I ran a forensic trace on the routing numbers associated with the transaction. The funds had not even rested in Marcus's personal checking accounts. They had been wired directly, in a single, massive lump sum, to the corporate billing department of the Silver Pine Estates. My in-laws had used my stolen asset to completely fund Chloe's obscenely lavish anniversary party. This desperate, reckless move answered a fundamental question I had been pondering for weeks. Why would Marcus, a man who always complained about temporary cash flow issues, suddenly volunteer to host a massive gala for his sister? I opened a secondary terminal and pulled the quarterly tax filings for his boutique corporate consulting firm. The numbers bled red across the screen. His business was not just struggling, it was effectively dead in the water. He was on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy, drowning in outstanding vendor payments and generating zero revenue for the past 3 quarters. He desperately needed this party to project an aura of immense, untouchable success, hoping to lure in oblivious investors to bail out his rapidly sinking ship. But the puzzle was still missing a crucial piece. A luxury car title is not a bearer bond. You cannot just hand it over to a financial institution without the registered owner's explicit documented consent. I deployed a penetration testing tool to access the encrypted repository of the lending institution and view the uploaded digital documents. There it was, displayed in crystal clear resolution, a comprehensive, notarized power of attorney document, granting Marcus full legal authorization to leverage my personal property and sign on my behalf. At the bottom of the final page rested my signature. It was a remarkably good forgery, mimicking the exact slant and pressure of my handwriting, right down to the slight loop I use on the letter L. He had forged my name. He had legally bound me as the primary guarantor for a massive black market debt. If he defaulted, which his financial records proved he inevitably would, the aggressive debt collectors would bypass him entirely and come directly after my personal estate. He was planning to let me take the fall for his financial ruin. A cold, calculating fury settled in my chest, rapidly followed by a profound, almost intoxicating sense of amusement. I dug deeper into the origin of this specific loan. Reputable, federally regulated banks do not issue $300,000 in cash against a vintage car title within a matter of hours, especially not on a weekend. Marcus had gone directly to the shadow market. He had used a boutique, high-yield credit organization that masqueraded as a legitimate private equity firm to bypass standard credit checks. I stared at the name of the lending entity flashing in bold font on my terminal. Obsidian Financial Solutions. The name sparked an immediate, photographic recollection in my brain. I did not even need to run a corporate registry search, but I did it anyway just to savor the absolute, undeniable irony of the situation. I logged into the secure, executive intranet of Viridian Apex Holdings, the conglomerate I ran. I pulled up the executive summary of our most recent hostile takeover. Just last quarter, my acquisitions team had aggressively bought out a massive, failing umbrella corporation. That corporation owned dozens of shady, decentralized subsidiaries. I scrolled down the master list of toxic assets currently awaiting corporate liquidation and restructuring. There, sitting quietly on row 42, was Obsidian Financial Solutions. I let out a low, dry laugh that echoed in the silent office. Marcus and Eleanor thought they had completely outsmarted the quiet, middle-class girl from Texas. They believed they had successfully stolen my property and shackled me to a crippling financial burden to fund their delusional high society masquerade. They had absolutely no idea about the sheer scale of the corporate web I commanded. By taking out that specific loan from that specific shadow lender, my husband and my mother-in-law had technically borrowed $300,000 directly from the very financial empire that I control. I did not just have leverage over them anymore. I had absolute, unmitigated ownership of their entire financial existence. They had willingly walked into a titanium trap, and I was the one holding the remote control to snap it shut. The power dynamic had completely shifted in the span of 30 minutes. They were currently sipping expensive champagne, laughing with their aristocratic guests, completely oblivious to the fact that their extravagant party was being hosted on my dime. Through a lender I owned, secured by a felony forgery I could prove in any court of law. I cracked my knuckles, minimizing the command windows on my screen. It was time to stop observing and start dismantling their entire world. I did not waste another second staring at the transaction screens. I reached for my encrypted satellite phone and dialed a private number that very few people possessed. It belonged to Victor Vance, a senior partner at the most ruthless corporate litigation firm in San Francisco. Victor was not the kind of lawyer you hired to negotiate a polite settlement over a cup of coffee. He was an apex predator in a tailored suit, an old wolf who specialized in dissecting financial empires and burying the remains of anyone foolish enough to cross his clients. He answered on the second ring, despite it being a weekend. "Laurel," his gravelly voice came through the receiver. "To what do I owe the pleasure on a Saturday morning?" "I am sending a heavily encrypted data packet to your secure server right now." "Victor," I replied, my voice devoid of any emotion, cold and calculated. "I need you to open it immediately." I hit the execution key on my terminal. Gigabytes of raw, undeniable proof funneled through the secure connection. I sent the high-resolution scans of the forged power of attorney, the exact geolocated Internet Protocol access logs, proving the documents were uploaded directly from Marcus's personal laptop, and the complete routing history of the illicitly obtained funds. I heard the sharp clicking of his mechanical keyboard on the other end of the line. For exactly 2 minutes, there was nothing but silence as his sharp legal mind processed the sheer magnitude of the stupidity he was looking at. "Laurel," Victor finally spoke, his tone shifting from casual greeting to dangerously professional. This is incredibly reckless on their part. It is a textbook federal offense. I am well aware, I said smoothly. But here is your explicit directive. You are not going to call the local police. Local authorities will turn this into a messy domestic dispute, and a sympathetic judge might let them post bail by midnight. I want a flawless, airtight federal prosecution file, and I want it expedited. Victor let out a low, impressed whistle. You understand the gravity of these specific charges, correct? We are looking at aggravated identity theft, interstate wire fraud, and falsifying financial instruments to secure capital. Given the high monetary value involved, federal sentencing guidelines will not be kind. If I hand this over to my contacts at the federal level, Marcus and Eleanor are looking at a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary. There will be no leniency, no early parole, and absolutely no plea deals. I stared at my reflection in the dark monitor, a cold, genuine smile spreading across my face. 15 years sounds like a highly appropriate amount of time for them to reflect on their life choices. Proceed. Consider it done, Victor replied. But before I make the call, we need to build an impenetrable firewall around you. He was absolutely right. I needed to legally and financially sever myself from their sinking ship before the federal torpedo hit. While keeping Victor on the open line, I activated an emergency asset protection protocol. With a rapid series of keystrokes and secondary biometric authentications, I initiated a total freeze on all joint accounts. I legally isolated every single trust, investment portfolio, and real estate deed tied to my name. I executed a preemptive legal injunction that declared myself a victim of financial identity theft, entirely removing my liability from the shadow debt. By the time my fingers left the keyboard, Marcus and I were completely and entirely financially divorced. If his creditors came looking for blood, they would find a solid titanium wall around my assets. The firewall is up and fortified, I informed Victor. Now, I want you to coordinate directly with the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Use every favor you have. I want a sealed arrest warrant signed by a federal judge today. But listen to me very carefully. Victor, the federal agents do not move until I give the absolute final signal. You are orchestrating a public execution, Victor noted, a hint of dark admiration evident in his voice. I am simply delivering the consequences they ordered, I replied before ending the call. The gears of the federal justice system were officially in motion, fueled by undeniable digital evidence and guided by the best legal mind money could buy. Every legal chess piece had been perfectly positioned on the board. It had taken me exactly 3 hours to transform a petty attempt at domestic humiliation into an inescapable federal trap. The net was drawn completely tight, leaving absolutely no room for escape. Now, I just needed to take total control of the stage where the final act of their tragedy would play out. To execute a flawless public execution, one must possess absolute control over the execution grounds. Sending federal agents to a third-party venue leaves too many unpredictable variables in the hands of strangers. Resort managers might panic. Security guards could interfere. And the sheer chaos could allow Marcus and Eleanor a brief window to play the victim card in front of the authorities. I refused to let that happen. If they wanted to perform a grand illusion for the Napa Valley elite, I needed to become the unseen director of their little play. I opened my corporate portfolio database and pulled the master financial dossier on Silver Pine Estates. Behind its manicured lawns, crystal chandeliers, and Michelin-starred catering, the resort was a rotting financial carcass. The hospitality group that owned the property had defaulted on a massive commercial mortgage restructuring package exactly 2 months ago. The primary holder of that debt was none other than the real estate division of Viridian Apex Holdings. They owed my company millions of dollars, and their grace period had officially evaporated. I initiated an emergency, high-priority video conference, overriding the weekend protocols for the Silver Pine Board of Directors. Within 5 minutes, the screen populated with the panicked faces of 5 wealthy men sitting in their respective home offices, completely unprepared for an ambush by the chief executive officer of their primary creditor. I did not bother with pleasantries or introductions. I shared my screen, displaying the unarguable reality of their defaulted loan agreements highlighted in stark red. "Gentlemen," I began, my voice cutting through their confused murmurs like a scalpel. "Your grace period ended at midnight. As of this exact moment, Viridian Apex Holdings has the legal authority to seize your flagship property and liquidate every single asset, down to the imported linen on your dining tables. However, I am willing to offer you a highly unconventional, temporary reprieve." The chairman of the board swallowed hard, his face pale against his expensive golf shirt. "What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Benson? We just need another 30 days to secure bridging capital." "You do not have 30 minutes, let alone 30 days, I countered smoothly, staring directly into the camera. "I have just forwarded a temporary operational transfer agreement to your respective inboxes. It grants me, personally, absolute management authority over Silver Pine Estates for the next 48 hours, effectively offsetting the immediate penalty fees of your default. You will sign it right now, on this call. Using your digital authentication keys, if anyone hesitates, my legal team will file the liquidation papers before you finish your next breath." The sheer brutality of the ultimatum left them entirely paralyzed. They knew they had no leverage, one by one. I watched their eyes dart to their secondary monitors. The digital signatures began to populate on my master document. The entire hostile takeover, from the moment I initiated the call to the final binding signature, took exactly 20 minutes. It was a bloodless corporate slaughter. The second the final signature registered, the dynamic of the universe shifted. I was no longer just the estranged, disrespected daughter-in-law sitting in a silent house. I was the absolute, undisputed owner of the very ground my husband and mother-in-law were currently standing on, every waiter pouring their expensive wine, every valet parking their stolen luxury cars, every security guard patrolling the perimeter. They all worked directly for me. I immediately dialed the direct line of the chief operations manager currently on duty at the resort. He answered with the polished, artificial tone reserved for VIP clients. "This is Laurel Benson," I stated clearly. "As of 10 minutes ago, I am the acting executive director of this property. Check your internal administrative portal if you require verification." I heard the furious tapping of a keyboard on his end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Ms. Benson, my apologies. How may I assist you today?" His tone had instantly transformed into one of absolute subservience. "You are currently hosting an anniversary gala for Chloe Benson," I instructed, my words measured and precise. "You are to maintain absolute secrecy regarding this transfer of power. Do not alert the hosts or any of the guests. However, you will immediately instruct your entire staff to grant Marcus and Eleanor Benson anything they demand. If they ask for the most expensive vintage champagne in the cellar, open it. If they demand an upgraded ice sculpture, provide it. Inflate their egos to the absolute maximum. Let them feel like absolute royalty. And when the time comes, you and your security team will follow my exact physical commands without a single moment of hesitation. Is that perfectly understood?" "Crystal clear, Ms. Benson. We await your arrival," the manager replied. The stage was officially mine. I closed my laptop and walked down the long corridor toward my master dressing room. If you are going to attend your own funeral, you should dress in black. But if you are going to burn down an empire of lies, you wear red. I bypassed the pastel luxury gowns and pulled out a fiercely structured, crimson-red designer dress. It was a garment that commanded absolute authority, a visual representation of the power I was about to unleash. As I adjusted the fabric, I pressed the intercom button connecting directly to my company's private aviation division. "Have the corporate helicopter fueled and on the private landing pad in 15 minutes. I ordered the chief pilot, file a direct flight path to the private helipad at Silver Pine Estates in Napa Valley. We have a party to crash." The rhythmic, deafening roar of my corporate helicopter descending upon the private landing pad tore through the serene atmosphere of the valley. It was a chaotic symphony of wind and engine noise that effectively drowned out the delicate string quartet playing in the meticulously manicured garden. As the aircraft touched down and the blades slowed, I stepped out into the warm California breeze. The crimson-red designer dress I wore flowed around me like a banner of war, a stark contrast to the pastel colors usually favored by this crowd. I ignored the bewildered, wide-eyed stares of the valet staff and walked with absolute, unhurried purpose toward the massive entrance of the grand hall. Every step I took was a calculated strike against the fake empire my in-laws had built. Inside the opulent ballroom, the air was incredibly thick with the scent of imported orchids and the nauseating hubris of the newly wealthy elite. 300 guests milled about under cascading crystal chandeliers, their wrists adorned with expensive watches they probably leased. At the absolute center of this grand illusion stood Marcus and Eleanor. They were holding court, clutching flutes of vintage champagne, surrounded by a captive audience of local socialites. They were laughing loudly, radiating the false confidence of people who believed they had successfully pulled off the ultimate heist. The heavy, brass-studded oak doors swung open, and I stepped fully into the light of the ballroom. The murmurs near the entrance died instantly. The silence was contagious, creating a rapid wave of quiet that spread across the massive room until the only sound left was the clinking of ice in glasses. Eleanor caught sight of me. For a fraction of a second, raw, unadulterated panic flashed across her meticulously lifted face, but she was a seasoned actress in the theater of high society. She instantly shifted her posture, transforming from a triumphant queen into a long-suffering, exhausted matriarch. She placed a dramatic hand over her thick pearl necklace and projected her voice so that every single guest within a 50-foot radius could hear her clearly. Good heavens, Laurel, arriving so terribly late on such an important day. You are always so completely irresponsible, leaving my poor son to handle everything entirely by himself. We were beginning to think you simply did not care enough about this family to even make an appearance. The crowd began to whisper, casting judgmental, sideways glances in my direction. They were fully prepared to witness a pathetic domestic squabble, eager for some cheap entertainment to pair with their caviar. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, a towering figure stepped out from the dense crowd. It was my biological father. As a retired Supreme Court judge from the state of Texas, he possessed a natural, commanding aura that could silence a packed courtroom with a single, heavy glare. He had flown in specifically as a guest of honor, and he did not suffer fools gladly. He took a slow, deliberate sip from his heavy crystal bourbon glass, his piercing silver eyes scanning the room, effortlessly taking in Eleanor's fake distress and my absolute, unwavering calm. He took 2 steps toward me, his stance wide and unmovable. His voice boomed with absolute authority, cutting directly through the toxic whispers of the crowd like a heavy blade. I am asking, why didn't you drive? It was a brilliant, pointed question. He knew my strict habits. He knew I would never abandon my prized vintage car on a day like today, especially when the weather was completely perfect for a drive. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. The string quartet completely stopped playing their instruments. I locked my gaze firmly with Eleanor. The smug satisfaction was rapidly draining from her eyes, replaced by a creeping, icy dread as she realized I was not playing by her script. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell or cry. I simply smiled, a terrifying, predatory curve of the lips that promised absolute destruction, and delivered my answer with terrifying clarity. I said my mother-in-law hid my keys to trap me. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. It was the kind of deafening quiet that precedes a catastrophic explosion. Eleanor's jaw practically unhinged in shock. She looked around frantically, realizing that her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling into dust before her very eyes. Exposed by a single sentence. Marcus, however, chose the path of explosive, blind arrogance. His face turned a violent, ugly shade of red. The veins in his neck bulged dangerously against his tightly starched tuxedo collar. He slammed his champagne glass onto a nearby silver tray, shattering the delicate crystal into dozens of pieces, and pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at my face. "How dare you come here and ruin our family honor?" he screamed, his voice cracking with desperate rage. He turned wildly toward the perimeter of the room, waving his arms at the security personnel stationed by the massive doors. "Guards, get this hysterical woman out of here immediately. I am a very important person. I am a high-tier client who just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars at this exact establishment. I demand that you remove her right this instant." Heavy footsteps echoed loudly across the polished marble floor. The chief operations manager of the estate emerged from the shadows, flanked by 4 massive, stone-faced security guards in dark suits. Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, a smug, triumphant sneer returning to his face, fully expecting me to be dragged out into the dirt in front of everyone. But the manager did not even glance in Marcus's direction. He walked straight past my furious husband, stopping directly in front of me, to the absolute shock and horror of every single aristocrat in the room. The manager bent at the waist, executing a flawless 90-degree bow of total submission. He straightened up, pulled a small communication microphone from his lapel, and spoke with a booming voice that echoed through the entire sound system of the hall. "Ms. Benson, as the new president of the resort, how would you like to handle these uninvited guests?" The collective gasp that echoed through the grand ballroom was loud enough to rival the deafening roar of my helicopter. All 300 aristocratic guests stood completely frozen in place, their expensive champagne glasses hovering in mid-air. The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. Marcus and Eleanor instantly lost every single drop of color in their faces, turning a sickly pale shade of ash. The arrogant fire that had burned so brightly in my husband's eyes just moments before was entirely extinguished, replaced by a hollow, pathetic terror. He opened his mouth, desperately trying to stammer out a coherent sentence, but his vocal cords completely failed him. I did not give them a single second to recover. I calmly reached into my structured designer clutch and withdrew a thick stack of tightly folded, heavily notarized legal documents. I held the papers up high so the chandeliers could illuminate the undeniable proof of their crimes. "Since my husband loves to boast about his immense wealth," I announced, projecting my voice so every single person in the massive hall could hear the undeniable truth. "Let me share exactly how he funded this extravagant charade. Less than 24 hours ago, Marcus and his mother forged my signature on a binding legal contract to secure a high-interest cash loan of $300,000. They did not borrow this money from a reputable bank. They went to a black market shadow credit syndicate, and to secure this massive, illegal debt, they stole my vintage car and pledged it as collateral." The whispers among the crowd instantly transformed into loud, chaotic murmurs of absolute disgust. High society can forgive many sins, but they absolutely despise financial fraud, especially when it involves cheap, desperate shadow debt. Eleanor clutched her chest, her fake pearls practically digging into her skin, shaking her head frantically as if she could deny reality. At that exact moment, the ambient classical music playing over the estate sound system was abruptly cut off. The warm, golden ambient lights shifted to a harsh, blinding white overhead glare. The massive double doors of the grand hall did not just open. They were violently thrust apart. A tactical team of local police officers, flanked by 2 stern agents wearing federal windbreaker jackets, marched directly into the center of the room. The lead agent held a thick stamped folder in his right hand. "Marcus Benson and Eleanor Benson," the federal agent announced, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. "We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest on multiple felony charges of interstate wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and grand larceny." Total pandemonium erupted. Marcus tried to take a step back, but 2 local officers aggressively grabbed his arms, forcing them behind his back with a sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs. Eleanor let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She flailed her arms wildly as a female officer moved to restrain her. In her chaotic struggle, Eleanor lost her balance and crashed backward directly into Chloe's magnificent 10-tier vanilla buttercream anniversary cake. The massive, expensive structure collapsed in a spectacular explosion of white frosting and shattered crystal stands, burying my mother-in-law in a sticky, humiliating mess. Chloe fell to her knees in the middle of the ruined frosting, sobbing violently and screaming at the police to stop. But the absolute final blow did not come from the federal authorities. It came from Chloe's own husband, the groom, realizing that his family was about to be legally tied to a massive black market debt and a catastrophic public scandal, ripped the floral boutonniere from his tuxedo jacket and threw it onto the marble floor. "I am completely done with you and this psychotic family," he shouted over Chloe's hysterical wailing. "Consider this marriage completely annulled. I am calling my lawyers right now." He turned his back on his sobbing wife and marched straight out the front doors without a single ounce of hesitation. The fake, glittering mask of the Benson family had been violently ripped away, exposing the rotting, desperate core underneath. The wealthy guests, realizing they were standing in the middle of a federal crime scene, began rushing toward the exits in absolute droves. They cast looks of profound contempt and mockery at Marcus, who was now weeping openly as the agents marched him toward the waiting patrol vehicles. The entire delusional empire they had sacrificed their dignity to build had completely collapsed into a pile of pathetic, sugary rubble in less than 5 minutes. I stood completely undisturbed amidst the chaos. A senior police officer walked over to me, holding a small plastic evidence bag. Inside the bag rested the familiar silver keychain of my vintage car. "Your vehicle has been cleared from the impound list, ma'am," the officer said respectfully, handing me the bag. "It is safely parked right outside the main lobby." I thanked him politely. Slipping the keys out of the plastic, I did not bother looking back at Marcus or Eleanor. They were no longer my problem. They belonged to the federal justice system now. I walked gracefully through the grand, empty lobby, stepping out into the crisp, refreshing night air of Napa Valley. My beautiful classic car was waiting for me under the glow of the resort entrance lights. I slid into the driver's seat, the familiar roar of the engine vibrating powerfully beneath me. I shifted into gear and drove off into the dark, starlit sky, leaving behind the shattered remains of those who had to pay the ultimate price for their own ignorance and greed. It was the perfect ending to a very simple lesson. Never attempt to wake the sleeping monster inside a truly independent woman. Thank you so much to all the wonderful listeners for tuning in to today's story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please let us know your city or country in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help us keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can scan the donation QR code currently on your screen or click the donation link in the description or the comments section. Your support helps pay our hardworking staff, allowing them to feed their families and continue creating these amazing stories for you. Have a fantastic day, and we will see you in the next one.